My wife Lydia placed the steaming bowl of oatmeal in front of me with a smile that was too wide, too bright, and entirely fake. Her hands trembled slightly as she sprinkled what she called vitamin powder over the surface. She told me it was to help with my memory, to clear the fog that had settled over my brain these past 6 months. I watched her pupils dilate, a biological betrayal she could not control. It was the look of a gambler pushing all her chips into the center of the table. That morning I did not eat it. I had set an alarm on the landline phone in the hallway to ring at exactly 8:05 a.m. When she turned her back to answer it, annoyed and distracted, I switched our bowls. It took me less than 4 seconds. When she returned, she sat down and ate the breakfast intended for me. 20 minutes later, the woman I had been married to for 10 years was not dead. She was laughing at the wall, her eyes unmoored from reality, confessing to her lover that she was tired of waiting for the old man to die. My name is Edward Mercer. I am 70 years old, and for the last half year, my family has been convinced I am losing my mind to early-onset Alzheimer's. They see a trembling old man who forgets his keys and stares blankly at the television. They do not see the man who spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, hunting down corporate fraud and dismantling embezzlement schemes for the government. They do not know that the fog in my brain was not a disease but a poison they fed me spoon by spoon. That bowl of oatmeal was supposed to be my final ticket to a mental institution. Instead, it became their death sentence. Before I tell you how I destroyed them, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe betrayal should never go unpunished. The kitchen smelled of lemon-scented bleach. It always did lately. The sharp chemical odor hung heavy in the air, masking the aroma of the coffee and the toast, but more importantly, masking any subtle chemical scent that might rise from my food. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my hands resting on the placemat. I let them shake. It had become a performance I practiced in the mirror every night. The tremor in the left hand, the vacant stare, the slight slackening of the jaw. It was the camouflage of the prey, designed to make the predators confident. Lydia stood by the counter, her back to me. She was 62, a woman who spent more time at the beauty salon than she did at home, trying desperately to cling to a youth that had fled a decade ago. She was humming a tune, something cheerful. That was the first mistake. Amateur criminals always act too happy when they think the end is in sight. A professional stays neutral. Lydia was vibrating with anticipation. She turned around carrying 2 bowls of oatmeal on a serving tray. One was blue, one was white. The blue one was mine. It was always the blue one. She placed it in front of me with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. "Here you go, Edward," she said, her voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness one uses for a child or a dog. "Eat up. Dr. Reed said you need your strength for the appointment today." I looked down at the gray sludge. Oatmeal. Every single day for 6 months. It was easy to drug. It masked textures. It masked tastes. I looked up at her, blinking slowly, playing the part. "Thank you, Lydia," I mumbled, my voice raspy. "You are so good to me." She smiled, and that was when I saw it. I spent 4 decades analyzing human behavior across a negotiation table. I learned to spot the tell of a CFO who had cooked the books, the nervous tick of a CEO who was hiding millions in offshore accounts. Lydia's tell was in her eyes. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing the iris-black pools of adrenaline. It was not love. It was the physiological response to high-stakes risk. She was excited. She was terrified. She sat opposite me with the white bowl. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet. "Just your vitamins, sweetheart," she said. She tore it open and sprinkled a fine off-white powder over my blue bowl. She did not sprinkle any on hers. "Why don't you have vitamins?" I asked, keeping my voice weak and confused. She didn't even look up. "I don't need them, Edward. My memory is fine. Yours is the one that is failing." Remember, you left the stove on again last night. I had not left the stove on. I had not touched the stove in weeks. But that was part of the campaign. Gaslighting. Making me doubt my own reality. But I knew something she didn't. I knew that my memory was perfect. I remembered the exact balance of my secret investment portfolio. I remembered the code to the safe that Jason, my son, had been trying to crack for weeks. And I remembered that Dr. Reed, the man she cited as an authority, had lost his medical license in 2 other states before setting up shop in this town. Lydia stirred the powder into my oatmeal, watching it dissolve. "Eat," she commanded softly, "before it gets cold." The phone rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that sliced through the kitchen's silence. I had set the alarm on my prepaid burner phone hidden deep inside the hallway coat closet to call the landline at exactly 8:05 a.m. I flinched, exaggerating my startled response, knocking a spoon onto the floor. Lydia sighed, a sound of pure irritation. "Who is calling this early?" She slammed her napkin onto the table. "Stay there, Edward. Don't make a mess." She stood up and walked into the hallway to answer it. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. I counted the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She was out of the room. I did not hesitate. I did not shake. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly. I reached out with the precision of a man who used to dismantle bombs in the army before he ever looked at a spreadsheet. I grabbed my blue bowl and her white bowl. I lifted them simultaneously, crossing my arms in the air, and set them down in opposite positions. The blue bowl was now in front of her empty chair. The white bowl was in front of me. I picked up my spoon and took a scoop of the clean, unadulterated oatmeal from the white bowl and smeared a little on my lip to make it look like I had started eating. Then I sat back, slumped my shoulders, and waited. The entire operation took 6 seconds. Lydia returned, looking furious. "It was just a hang-up," she spat. "Prank callers. Honestly, nobody has any respect anymore." She sat down. She looked at me. "Why aren't you eating?" I said, pointing to the oatmeal on my lip. "It is hot." "Good," she said. She pulled the blue bowl closer to her. The bowl she believed was safe. The bowl that contained the powder. She picked up her spoon, took a large bite, and swallowed. I watched her throat move. I watched the poison enter her system. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I only felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing out. She ate quickly, eager to get the meal over with, so she could get to the next part of her day, which I assumed involved meeting with my son Jason to discuss the sale of my house. I ate my clean oatmeal, slowly counting the minutes in my head. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 10 minutes. She started tapping her fingers on the table. She looked at her watch. She looked at me, expecting me to slump over, expecting the drool to start. 15 minutes. Lydia frowned. She rubbed her temples. "Is it hot in here?" she asked. "No," I said. "It is quite cool." She loosened the silk scarf around her neck. "I feel dizzy." She let out a small, high-pitched giggle. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was the sound of a wire snapping inside a machine. Lydia looked at the window. The sun was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes. "Look at the colors," she whispered. "Edward." "Why is the air purple?" I stopped eating. I leaned forward, dropping the act of the senile old man for just a second. "The air isn't purple, Lydia." She turned to look at me, but her eyes didn't focus. Her pupils were blown wide, consuming the entire eye. She looked terrified and ecstatic all at once. She wasn't dying. She wasn't choking. She was tripping. It wasn't arsenic. It wasn't rat poison. It was a hallucinogen, a high-dose psychotropic cocktail designed to mimic psychosis. They weren't trying to kill me physically. They were trying to murder my mind. They wanted me to hallucinate, to scream, to see monsters, so that when Dr. Reed arrived, he could certify me as dangerously insane and lock me away in a facility where I would never be heard from again. Lydia stood up, knocking her chair over. She swayed, grabbing the edge of the table. "Gavin," she called out to the empty room. "Gavin, where are you?" My heart went cold. Gavin was our neighbor, a man 20 years her junior who claimed to be a financial advisor but mostly spent his days washing his sports car in the driveway. "Gavin," she giggled again, stumbling toward the refrigerator. "The old man is still sitting there. Why won't he just die? I am so tired of pretending. I am so tired of the smell of old people." She hugged the refrigerator door, caressing the cold steel. "We can sell the house, Gavin. Jason said we can sell it by Monday. We will go to the island. Just you and me." She slid down the front of the refrigerator to the floor, laughing hysterically, tears streaming down her face. "The walls are melting, Edward," she screamed at me. "The walls are melting, and you are melting with them." I sat perfectly still. My mind raced, connecting the dots with forensic precision. The drug was meant to induce a psychotic break. If I had eaten that bowl, I would be the one on the floor screaming about melting walls. Dr. Reed would be called. He would sedate me. I would wake up in a padded room, and my power of attorney would be signed over to my son Jason before lunch. It was a brilliant plan. Evil, but brilliant. But now the architect of that plan was writhing on the kitchen floor, clawing at her own neck, whispering secrets to a lover who wasn't there. I stood up. My legs were strong. My balance was perfect. I walked over to where she lay. She looked up at me, her eyes wild, seeing a monster, seeing a ghost, seeing something only her chemically broken brain could conjure. "Who are you?" she hissed. "I am the man who checks the books, Lydia," I said softly. "And you are in the red." Suddenly the front door burst open. I heard heavy footsteps running down the hallway. It was Jason, my son, and behind him his wife Brittany. They must have been waiting outside in the car, waiting for the signal to come in and play the concerned family members, saving Grandpa from his episode. I quickly sat back down in my chair, slumped. My body let my mouth hang open and began to tremble. Jason ran into the kitchen. He was 35, wearing a suit that was too expensive for a man who had been unemployed for 8 months. He saw Lydia on the floor, clawing at the air, laughing maniacally. "Mom!" Jason shouted. He rushed to her. "Mom, what is happening?" Lydia looked at him and screamed. "Get away from me! You have snakes for fingers!" "Get away!" Jason recoiled. He looked at the table. He saw the empty blue bowl in front of Lydia. He saw the half-eaten white bowl in front of me. His face went pale. The color drained from him as the realization hit him like a physical blow. He turned to Brittany, who was standing in the doorway, horrified. "She ate the blue bowl," Jason whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "The idiot ate the blue bowl." Brittany looked at me, then at Lydia. "What do we do?" "We can't call 911. They'll do a toxicology screen. They'll find the stuff." I sat there watching them. My son. The boy I had adopted when he was 2 years old. The boy I had put through private school. The boy I had bailed out of debt 3 times. He was not looking at his mother with concern. He was looking at her with annoyance. He was calculating the risk to himself. "We stick to the plan," Jason hissed. He grabbed Lydia by the arms. She screamed and fought him. "Help me, Brittany. We have to get her into the guest bedroom. We have to let her sleep it off." "But what about him?" Brittany pointed at me. Jason looked at me. I offered him a vacant, confused stare. I let my hand shake against the table. "He is gone," Jason said with a sneer. "Look at him. He doesn't even know what day it is. The old fool is practically a vegetable already. We don't need the drugs for him today." We just need Dr. Reed to sign the papers. Call Dr. Reed, Jason commanded, dragging his screaming mother across the floor. Tell him to get here now. Tell him there has been a complication, but we are moving the timeline up. We are doing it today. Brittany nodded and pulled out her phone. I watched them drag Lydia out of the room. I listened to Brittany make the call. Dr. Reed. It is Brittany. Yes. No, listen. You need to come now. We are expediting the transfer. Yes. Sunnyvale. We want him in Sunnyvale by tonight. Sunnyvale. The name sent a chill through my blood. Sunnyvale wasn't a care facility. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. It was a place where people went to die of neglect, hidden away from the world. A dump with a high mortality rate and very low oversight. They weren't just going to lock me up. They were going to bury me alive. I waited until they were gone, until the sounds of their struggle haunted upstairs. I stood up and walked silently to the pantry. I reached behind the boxes of cereal to the false bottom of the shelf I had built 5 years ago. I pulled out a small digital recorder. It had been recording since 700 a.m. It had captured everything. Lydia's confession. Jason's realization. The mention of the blue bowl. The refusal to call 911. I put the recorder in my pocket. My hand brushed against the cool metal of a USB drive I kept there. It contained the encrypted access keys to my real bank accounts, the ones they didn't know existed. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was a senile old man waiting for the slaughter. They didn't know that I had already initiated a forensic audit of their lives. I knew about Jason's crypto debts, $2 million gone in a month. I knew about Brittany's credit card fraud, and now I knew about Gavin. The doorbell rang. It was Dr. Reed. I sat back down. I composed my face into a mask of confusion. The game was entering the second quarter. They wanted to take me to Sunnyvale. Fine. I would let them try. Because once I was out of this house, the real hunt would begin. Jason came running down the stairs, straightening his tie, sweating. He looked at me with pure hatred. "Don't say a word, old man," he whispered. "Just sit there and rot." He went to answer the door. I heard Dr. Reed's voice, smooth, professional, a predator in a white coat. "Where is the patient?" Dr. Reed asked. "In the kitchen," Jason said. "He is agitated. He is violent. We need to sedate him for transport immediately." Violent. That was the narrative. I smiled internally. If they wanted violent, I could give them violent, but not yet. Patience was the accountant's greatest weapon. I would wait for the numbers to align, and when they did, I would close their accounts permanently. Dr. Reed walked into the kitchen carrying a black medical bag. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Hello, Edward," he said, pulling a syringe from his bag. "It is time for your medicine." I watched the needle catch the light. I let my body go limp, slumping forward onto the table. "Let's dance, doctor," I thought. Dr. Reed approached me, capping the needle for a moment as he turned to speak to Jason. "Is the transfer vehicle ready?" "Yes," Jason said. "The private ambulance is in the alley. No neighbors will see." "Good," Dr. Reed said. "This shot will paralyze his voluntary muscles for about 2 hours. He will be awake, but he won't be able to move or speak. It makes the paperwork much easier when they can't object." He turned back to me. He grabbed my arm. He didn't bother to sanitize the skin. He jabbed the needle in. I didn't flinch. I let the drug enter my system. I knew what it was. Succinylcholine or something similar. A paralytic. I had about 3 minutes before my limbs stopped obeying me. 3 minutes to make a move, no. That would be foolish. If I fought now against 2 younger men, I might lose. And if I lost, they would just increase the dose or use a pillow. No. I had to let them take me. I had to let them think they had won. Because the ambulance was my exit strategy. An ambulance meant I was leaving the house, leaving the prison. I felt the coldness spread through my arms. My head grew heavy. I slumped further onto the table. "He is out," Reed said, tapping my cheek disrespectfully. "Let's load him up. The driver is waiting." Jason looked at me with disgust. Finally, he muttered, "Goodbye, Dad. Hope you like the food at Sunnyvale." They lifted me. I was dead weight. They carried me out the back door through the garden I had planted with my late first wife towards the waiting van. It wasn't a real ambulance. It was a black transport van with tinted windows. They tossed me onto a gurney in the back. The metal was cold. I lay there staring up at the ceiling of the van, my eyes unable to blink. Dr. Reed leaned over me. "Comfortable, Edward. Don't worry. You won't remember any of this. The brain damage from the shock therapy at the facility usually wipes the memory pretty clean." Shock therapy. They weren't just warehousing me. They were going to fry my brain to ensure I never testified. The doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life. I was alone in the back with a single orderly who was already scrolling on his phone, ignoring his patient. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. They had made one critical error. They had hired the cheapest transport they could find, and they had underestimated the metabolism of a man who ran 5 miles every morning before the sun came up. The drug was strong, but I was fighting it. I focused on my pinky finger. Move. Move. The van hit a pothole. We were on the move. I had to time this perfectly. I closed my eyes, feigning unconsciousness, and waited for the feeling to return to my fingertips. The road to Sunnyvale was long, and I had a lot of work to do. The screams that tore through the kitchen were not human. They were the sounds of a woman whose reality had just shattered into a kaleidoscope of terrors. Lydia was on the floor, clawing at the grout between the tiles, convinced that the floor was made of writhing snakes. But the reaction of the two people who burst into the room was even more terrifying than her hallucinations. Jason and Brittany did not rush to her side. They did not drop to their knees to check her pulse or cradle her head. They stopped 3 feet away, staring down at her, with the cold, annoyed expressions of people watching a waiter drop a tray of expensive drinks. There was no love in their eyes. There was only calculation and fury. "Get up!" Jason hissed, kicking the leg of the table near Lydia's head. "Get up, you stupid woman! You are ruining everything!" Lydia didn't hear him. She was too busy screaming about the spiders in her hair. Brittany crossed her arms, her knuckles white. She looked at Jason, her eyes narrowing into slits. "This wasn't the plan, Jason. You said she knew which bowl was which. You said she had it under control." "She did," Jason shouted back, running a hand through his thinning hair. He was sweating a cold, oily sheen on his forehead that I recognized immediately. It was the sweat of a man who owes money to people who don't send invoices. The old man must have moved it. He turned his glare toward me. I sat there blinking slowly, letting a line of saliva pool at the corner of my mouth. I tapped my spoon against the empty bowl, creating a rhythmic, annoying, clinking sound. "Hungry," I mumbled, staring past him at the refrigerator. "Is it lunchtime?" Jason looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pure, unadulterated hatred. He took a step toward me, his hands balling into fists, but Brittany grabbed his arm. "Don't touch him," she snapped. "Not yet. We need him unmarked for the intake photos at the facility. If he has bruises, they might ask questions." Jason spun away from me and paced the small kitchen, stepping over his mother's thrashing legs as if she were a piece of discarded luggage. "We are screwed, Brittany. Do you understand? We are completely screwed. The buyer for the house is coming on Monday morning with the cashier's check. $5 million. If we don't have the power of attorney signed by tonight, we can't close the sale. He slammed his fist against the counter. And if I don't have that cash by Monday afternoon, the margin call hits. They liquidate everything. I listened, my mind cataloging every word. Margin call. So it wasn't just gambling. It was leverage. My son, the genius who thought he was smarter than the market, had bet my house on a coin flip. It is worse than a margin call, Jason Brittany hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I saw the messages on your phone. It isn't just the exchange. You borrowed from the Russians in Brighton Beach to cover the last loss. Jason froze. He looked at her, his face draining of color. How did you know about that? Because I am the one keeping us afloat, you idiot, Brittany shouted, forgetting to keep her voice down. I maxed out 3 of the old man's credit cards last week just to pay the interest. If they find out the house sale is stalled, they aren't going to sue us. They are going to come here and break our legs. I tapped my spoon again. Clink, clink, clink. Jason flinched. Shut up, he roared at me. Just shut up and die already. He looked back at Brittany, panic rising in his voice. What do we do? Mom is useless. Look at her. She's tripping out of her mind. She can't sign anything. She can't witness anything. We don't need her, Brittany said, her mind working fast. Her eyes were cold, dead things. We pivot. We call Dr. Reed. We tell him the old man got violent. We tell him he attacked Lydia. That explains why she's on the floor screaming. We say he slipped her his meds or something. It doesn't matter. We just need him out of this house and declared incompetent by sunset. But the house, Jason stammered. The title is in his name. Once he is in the facility, you get emergency guardianship. Brittany explained, speaking slowly, as if to a child. We forge the rest. I already have the notary stamp I stole from my office. We backdate the transfer to last week. By the time anyone checks, the house is sold, the money is in the Cayman account, and we are on a plane to Dubai. I sat there watching them plot my demise and the theft of my life's work right in front of my face. They spoke freely, because to them I was furniture. I was a broken appliance that needed to be discarded. They didn't know they were confessing to a federal crime in front of a witness who had memorized the tax codes before they were born. Lydia let out a low moan and tried to grab Jason's ankle. Help me, she whimpered. The walls, they are bleeding. Jason shook her off with a revulsion that made my stomach turn. He grabbed a glass of water from the counter and splashed it onto her face. Wake up, he yelled. Go pass out in the bedroom. I can't deal with you right now. He looked at Brittany. Drag her into the guest room. Lock the door. If Dr. Reed sees her like this, he might charge us extra for the cleanup. Brittany sighed, the sound of a woman inconvenienced by the weight of a body, not the suffering of a human being. She grabbed Lydia by the shoulders and began to haul her out of the kitchen. Lydia's heels dragged across the hardwood, leaving scuff marks. Jason stood alone in the kitchen with me. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He loosened his tie. He walked over to the pantry and pulled out a bottle of my expensive scotch, a bottle I had been saving for my 75th birthday. He cracked the seal and took a long swig straight from the bottle. He wiped his mouth and leaned over me, his face inches from mine. The smell of alcohol and fear was pungent. You had a good run, old man, he whispered. You sat on a gold mine your whole life and gave us crumbs, allowances, budgets. You made me beg for every dime while you hoarded millions. Well, the bank is open now. He poked me hard in the chest. And you are making a withdrawal. A permanent one. I stared back at him, letting my eyes drift out of focus, letting my mouth hang slack. Inside, I was smiling. He thought he was opening a bank. He didn't realize he was walking into a vault that had already been locked from the outside. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Dr. Reed, it is Jason. Plan B. Get here. Now. And bring the heavy sedative. He is fighting back. He hung up and looked at me one last time. Don't worry, Dad. It will all be over soon. He was right. It would be over soon. But not for me. The doorbell rang with a sharp, insistent rhythm that signaled the arrival of a man who billed by the minute. I remained slumped in my chair, my chin resting on my chest, watching through half-closed eyelids as Jason rushed to answer it. He was wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers, a nervous tic he had developed as a teenager whenever he was about to lie to me about his report card. Now he was about to lie about my sanity. Dr. Reed swept into the kitchen like a cold draft. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, carrying a leather medical bag that looked more like a prop than a tool of healing. I recognized him instantly, not just from the brochures Lydia had left lying around, but from a file I had compiled 3 years ago on medical billing fraud in the tri-state area. He had managed to avoid prosecution by throwing his partners under the bus, but he had lost his hospital privileges. Now he made his money making house calls for wealthy families with inconvenient relatives. He didn't look at me. He looked at the chaos in the room. He looked at the spilled water, the overturned chair where Lydia had collapsed, and the bottle of scotch in Jason's hand. Rough Morning Reed asked, his voice smooth and devoid of empathy. "You have no idea," Jason muttered, closing the door behind him. The old man went berserk. "He attacked Mom. She is indisposed. We need him sedated and moved. Now." Reed walked over to the kitchen island and set his bag down. He snapped the latches open. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. He glanced at me with the disinterested gaze of a butcher, eyeing a side of beef. "He doesn't look violent," Reed noted, pulling out a vial of clear liquid and a syringe. "He looks catatonic." "He snaps," Brittany interjected, stepping forward. She was smoothing her skirt, trying to regain her composure. "One minute he is a vegetable, the next he is throwing steak knives. We can't risk it, doctor. We need full chemical restraint." Reed nodded, drawing the liquid into the syringe. He flicked the plastic cylinder with a fingernail to clear the air bubbles. "Standard protocol for an involuntary hold. This is a heavy paralytic cocktail. It will shut down his motor functions in about 3 minutes. He will be conscious but unable to move or speak. It makes the transport cleaner." I watched the needle. It was long, too long, and the dosage in that barrel was enough to drop a horse. If that went into my vein, I wouldn't just be paralyzed. My heart would stop. Reed wasn't just trying to sedate me. He was being reckless enough to kill me, knowing that if I died, he could just sign a death certificate citing cardiac arrest due to advanced age. I had to move, but I had to move smart. Jason and Brittany began to argue again, their voices rising. "You need to pay him cash," Jason Brittany hissed. "He doesn't take checks." "I don't have $5,000 in cash," Jason shouted back. "I told you the accounts are frozen until the transfer goes through." Reed stopped preparing the shot. He looked at Jason, his eyebrow raised. "Payment is due upon services rendered, Jason. That was the agreement. I don't move the body until I see the money." While they bickered over the price of my freedom, I prepared myself. I had spent 20 years in the field, auditing construction sites and shipping docks. I knew how to use leverage and distraction. I knew that in a chaotic system, a small variable could change the outcome. I began to make a low guttural noise in my throat. A growl. Jason turned to me. "See? He is doing it again." Reed sighed, annoyed by the delay in his payday. "Hold his arm," he ordered Jason. "Let's get this over with. Then we can discuss the fee." Jason approached me. He grabbed my left arm roughly, shoving my sleeve up. His grip was clammy and weak. He had never done a day of manual labor in his life. I let my arm stay limp, dead weight. Reed approached with the needle. He didn't bother with a tourniquet. He didn't bother swabbing the skin with alcohol. He was a hack. He was aiming for the large vein in the crook of my elbow, but he was looking at Brittany, who was pacing frantically by the window. Now I thought. Just as the needle tip touched my skin, I unleashed the energy I had been coiling in my core. I didn't pull away. I didn't punch. I triggered a violent full-body spasm, thrashing my upper body to the right. It was the movement of a man having a seizure, unpredictable and forceful. Jason, startled and weak, lost his grip on my forearm. My arm jerked inward toward my chest. Reed, committed to the stabbing motion, couldn't stop. He thrust the needle down, but my arm wasn't there anymore. In the confusion, in the split second of my violent thrash, I had twisted my torso. The needle didn't find my vein. It didn't even find my muscle. It plunged deep into the thick, folded wool of my heavy cardigan, burying itself in the fabric, bunched under my armpit, grazing the skin, but depositing its deadly load into the sweater, not my bloodstream. I let out a choke, a gasp, and then instantly went limp again, slumping hard against the table, trapping the needle and the wet fabric between my arm and my body so they couldn't see where the liquid had gone. "Jesus!" as Jason yelled, jumping back. He almost bit me. Reed pulled the empty syringe back, frowning. He hadn't felt the resistance of flesh, but in the chaos, he assumed he had hit the mark. He looked at the empty barrel. "It is in," Reed said, tossing the syringe into his bag. He didn't check the injection site. He didn't check my pulse. He just wanted to get paid. I lay perfectly still, my face pressed against the cold wood of the table. The wet spot on my shirt was cold against my ribs, soaking into my undershirt. I held my breath, slowing my heart rate, a technique I learned to beat lie detectors in the 90s. "Is he out?" Brittany asked, her voice trembling. "Give it a second," Reed said, looking at his watch. I counted to 10. Then I let my mouth hang open. I relaxed every muscle in my face. I let my eyes roll back slightly, just enough to show the whites, but kept a sliver of vision open to watch them. "He is under," Reed declared, grabbing my wrist and dropping it. It hit the table with a thud. I made sure it didn't flinch. "Good." Jason exhaled, the tension leaving his frame. "Get the van. Let's get him out of here before the neighbors see." They thought I was paralyzed. They thought I was a prisoner in my own body, a silent witness to my own demise. They didn't know that my muscles were coiled, ready to strike. They didn't know that the only thing paralyzing me was the sheer cold discipline of a man waiting for the perfect moment to execute his audit. The doctor and my son grabbed me by the shoulders and knees. They hoisted me up. I let my head loll back, staring upside down at the kitchen I had built for my family. As they carried me out the back door, I saw Brittany picking up the phone again, probably to call the bank. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy the silence. Because the storm is coming. The world tilted on its axis as they maneuvered my limp body through the back door. My head lolled back, and through the slit of my eyelids, I saw the gray sky of a November afternoon. It was the kind of sky that promised rain, a cold, miserable drizzle that would wash away footprints and secrets. I focused on the rhythm of their breathing. Jason was panting, his grip on my ankles slippery with sweat. Dr. Reed breathed evenly, the exertion of carrying a man my size barely registering on his heart rate. He was used to moving bodies. They reached the black van parked in the alleyway behind my garden. It wasn't a registered ambulance. It was a cargo van with painted windows, the kind used by plumbers or kidnappers. The side door slid open with a rusty screech that set my teeth on edge. The smell wafted out immediately, a mixture of stale cigarette smoke, industrial disinfectant, and something metallic that smelled like old copper. Blood. "Up on 3, Reed commanded. 1, 2, 3. They swung me. My hip slammed against the metal frame of the door before they dumped me onto the gurney. Pain shot up my leg, sharp and electric, but I didn't flinch. I let my hand flop off the side of the mattress, swaying lifelessly. "Strap him down," Reed ordered. "Tight. I don't want him thrashing if the paralytic wears off early. Though with the dose I gave him, he should be a statue for at least 4 hours." I felt the nylon straps cinch across my chest, my thighs, and my ankles. They pulled them hard, cutting off the circulation, turning me into a package ready for shipping. I regulated my breathing, shallow and slow. I was a submarine running silent, running deep. Jason stood by the open door looking down at me. I could feel his gaze. It was heavy with guilt, yes, but heavier with relief. He wasn't seeing his father. He was seeing an obstacle that had finally been cleared from the road. "Where are you taking him?" Jason asked, his voice low, glancing nervously up and down the alley. Sunnyvale, Reed replied, the sound of him snapping his medical bag shut echoing in the small space. Jason paused. "Sunnyvale, isn't that the place the state investigated last year? The one out in the marshes, it is secure." Jason Reed said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is off the grid. No visitors without a court order. No cell reception. High walls. And the staff, let's just say they understand the value of discretion. They don't ask questions about bruises or sudden declines in health. They just cash the checks." He stepped closer to Jason, lowering his voice, but I heard every syllable. I recorded it in the hard drive of my mind, filing it away under evidence. "We put him in the isolation wing," Reed continued. "Room 404. It is in the basement level. Soundproof. He can scream all he wants about bank accounts and conspiracies. The only people who will hear him are the orderlies, and they know the drill. Sedation every 4 hours. Keep him pliable. Keep him confused." Jason shifted his weight. "And the timeline? We need the signature for the house sale. The buyer is coming Monday morning." Reed chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't worry about the signature. Once he is processed at Sunnyvale, I will declare him incompetent. I will sign the emergency guardianship papers tonight. You will have full power of attorney by tomorrow morning. You can sign the deed yourself. Sell the house Monday. Pay off your debts." And then Jason asked. The question hung in the damp air. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and chilling. "Then we wait. We keep him comfortable. We keep him sedated. 6 months is the standard waiting period. It looks natural. Old age. Failure to thrive. A bout of pneumonia in the winter is very common for patients in his condition." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We stop the antibiotics in March, Jason. Nature takes its course. We pull the plug, figuratively speaking. By April, you bury him with full honors, play the grieving son, and the rest of the estate, the insurance, the pension, it all transfers to you. Clean. Simple." I lay there, the cold metal of the gurney seeping into my back. They weren't just locking me away. They were scheduling my execution. March. They had put a date on my death like it was a quarterly earnings report. Jason let out a long, shaky breath. "Okay. Okay. Do it. Just make sure he never comes back here." "He won't," Reed promised. "He is a ghost now, Jason. He doesn't exist." Reed slapped the side of the van. "Let's go. I have a tea time at 3. The doors slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. The only light came from the small, barred window separating the driver's cabin from the cargo area. I heard the driver's door open and close. The engine roared to life, vibrating through the floor, through the gurney, through my bones. I was alone in the back, or so I thought. As the van lurched forward, bouncing over the potholes of the alley, I heard a sound from the corner of the cargo area. A lighter flicking. The smell of cheap menthol tobacco filled the space. There was an orderly sitting on a jump seat in the corner. I hadn't seen him come in. "Hey, Doc," the orderly shouted to the driver. "This the guy with the millions?" "Shut up and watch him," the driver yelled back. The orderly chuckled. He didn't look at me. He was looking at his phone. I could hear the digital sounds of a slot machine game. Ding, ding, ding. He was gambling, just like my son. I lay in the dark, the fake paralysis heavy on my limbs, but the fire in my gut burning hotter than it ever had. They were taking me to Sunnyvale. They were going to sell my home on Monday. They were going to kill me in March. They had a plan, a timeline, a budget. But they had made a fatal error in their calculations. They forgot to account for the variable sitting in the back of the van. They forgot that I wasn't just a ledger entry to be deleted. I flexed my fingers inside the straps. The sensation was returning. The adrenaline was burning through the trace amounts of the drug that might have entered my system. Monday was 2 days away. Sunnyvale was an hour away. I didn't need 6 months. I needed 20 minutes. The van turned onto the highway, picking up speed. I listened to the tires singing on the asphalt. I waited for the orderly to get distracted by a bonus round. I opened my eyes fully in the darkness. The game was afoot, and I was about to fold their hand. The van hummed with the vibration of the highway, a constant low-frequency rumble that traveled up through the metal legs of the gurney and settled in my spine. I was moving at 65 miles per hour, toward a place designed to erase people, and the only thing standing between me and a chemical lobotomy was a nylon strap and a man named Steve. I saw his name on the laminated badge dangling from his neck as he leaned forward, the blue light of his smartphone illuminating a face ravaged by bad choices and indifference. He was deep into a game of online poker. I could hear the digital shuffle of cards and the chirping sound of a small win. He wasn't watching me. Why would he? I was a 70-year-old man pumped full of enough paralytics to drop a rhino. To him, I was just cargo, a sack of meat with a billing code. He took a drag from his vape pen, exhaling a cloud of synthetic strawberry vapor that mixed with the smell of old blood in the back of the van. I tested the restraints again. Dr. Reed had ordered them tight, but Steve was lazy. He had cinched the ankle straps until they bit into my skin, but the chest strap, the one that mattered, was loose. There was about an inch of give. It was enough. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I prayed Steve couldn't hear over the road noise. I focused on my breathing. In, out. I needed oxygen. I needed clarity. I wasn't an old man anymore. I was back in the field 25 years ago, auditing a construction firm in Jersey run by the mob. I was the man who walked into rooms where people wanted me dead and walked out with their ledgers. Steve cursed at his phone. He had lost a hand. He slammed the device against his thigh and looked over at me. For a second, our eyes met. I kept mine glassy, staring past him at the rivets on the ceiling. "You still with us, Pops?" he sneered. "Don't worry. Sunnyvale has a great bingo night." He laughed at his own joke and looked back down at the screen. That was his fatal mistake. He broke eye contact. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I exhaled all the air in my lungs to shrink my ribcage, creating just enough space to slide my right arm out from under the strap. It burned. The friction tore the skin off my wrist, but the pain was distant, irrelevant. My arm was free. Steve didn't notice. The game was dealing a new hand. I reached up. My hand found the buckle of the chest strap. It was a standard plastic clip, the kind you find on a child's car seat. I pressed the sides. Click. The sound was sharp, louder than a gunshot in the confined space. Steve's head snapped up. His eyes went wide. He opened his mouth to shout to the driver. I sat up. The motion was explosive, fueled by a rage I had been suppressing for 6 months. I didn't feel 70. I felt like iron. My left hand shot out and grabbed Steve by the throat, crushing his windpipe before he could make a sound. His phone clattered to the floor. He clawed at my hand, his eyes bulging. He was young, maybe 30, and strong, but he was panicked. I was calm. I squeezed harder, using the leverage of my body weight to pin him against the wall of the van. Quiet, I whispered, my face inches from his. Fold. He gurgled, his face turning a dark shade of red. He tried to reach for the panic button near the intercom, but I caught his wrist with my free hand. I twisted it, hard. There was a sickening pop as the joint gave way. He slumped, the fight draining out of him as oxygen starvation took hold. I didn't kill him. I wasn't a murderer. I was an auditor. I just needed him to stop operating. I pressed my thumb into the pressure point behind his jaw. His eyes rolled back. He went limp. I let him slide to the floor, panting. My heart was racing now, skipping beats, reminding me of my age. But I wasn't done. The driver was still cruising down the interstate, oblivious to the coup that had just taken place in his cargo hold. I unbuckled my legs. I stood up, swaying as the van changed lanes. I was wearing hospital scrubs. Dr. Reed had changed me into thin blue cotton that offered no warmth. I grabbed Steve's jacket from the hook on the wall and threw it on. It smelled of smoke, but it had pockets. I searched the unconscious orderly. Wallet, keys, a pocket knife. I took the knife. I moved to the partition window. Through the wire mesh, I could see the back of the driver's head. He was bobbing to the radio, completely unaware. I needed him to stop. But if I attacked him now, he might swerve and roll the van at 70 miles per hour, killing us all. I needed him to pull over voluntarily. I looked around the van. I saw the medical cabinet. It was unlocked. Inside were rows of sedatives, bandages, and a small canister of oxygen. I grabbed the oxygen tank. It was heavy steel. I walked to the back doors of the van. I checked the lock mechanism. It was a simple latch. I turned back to the partition. I slammed the oxygen tank against the metal wall, screaming in a high-pitched, terrified voice. "Help, he is seizing. He is biting his tongue. Help." I dropped the tank, letting it clang against the floor, and then threw myself against the wall, making the whole van shake. The driver shouted something I couldn't hear. The van swerved slightly, then the brake lights flared. He was pulling over. He wasn't stopping out of kindness. He was stopping because a dead patient meant paperwork and an investigation. The van decelerated. The tires crunched onto the gravel shoulder. The engine idled. I stood by the side door, the knife in my hand, my back pressed against the wall. The driver's door opened. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel. The side door handle turned. "Hey, Steve, what the hell is going on back?" The door slid open. The driver, a burly man with a thick neck, stepped into the opening. He saw Steve unconscious on the floor. He saw the empty gurney. He didn't see me until I stepped out from the shadows. I didn't stab him. I stepped into his space and drove my knee into his groin with the force of a pile driver. He doubled over, wheezing, all the air leaving his body. I brought the handle of the knife down on the back of his neck. He dropped to his knees, then face-planted into the gravel. I stood there for a moment, the cold wind whipping through the thin scrubs, rain starting to spot the pavement. Cars whizzed by on the highway, blurs of light and noise. Nobody stopped. Nobody noticed the old man standing over a fallen driver on the side of the road. I looked at the driver. He was groaning, trying to get up. I couldn't take the van. It had a GPS tracker, Dr. Reed would know exactly where it was. I needed to disappear. I reached into the driver's pocket and took his phone. I threw it into the tall grass of the ditch. Then I took his wallet. Cash. $300. It would do. I started running. Not along the highway, but away from it. I scrambled up the embankment, my loafers slipping on the wet grass. I crested the hill and saw the lights of the city in the distance. I was miles from home, miles from safety. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. I found a service road and started walking, thumbing a ride. A beat-up pickup truck slowed down. An old farmer looked at me, at the mismatched jacket, the scrubs peeking out from underneath. "Car trouble?" he asked. "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady, my eyes clear. "My son, he kicked me out. I just need to get to the city, to my lawyer." The farmer spat out the window. "Kids these days, hop in." I climbed into the cab. The heat was on. It felt like heaven. As we pulled away, leaving the black van and the unconscious men behind, I reached into my pocket and touched the USB drive. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a ghost, and I was going to haunt them until they begged for mercy. The farmer dropped me off 2 blocks from the glass monolith that housed Blackwood and Associates. I walked the rest of the way, ignoring the stinging pain in my feet where the hospital slippers had worn through. I looked like a vagrant, a madman, who had wandered away from his caregivers wearing dirty scrubs and a jacket that smelled of stale tobacco. The security guard in the lobby stepped forward to intercept me, his hand resting on his taser, but I didn't slow down. "I am here to see Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the marble acoustics of the lobby like a razor. "Tell him it is Edward. Tell him the ledger doesn't balance." The guard hesitated. He saw something in my eyes that didn't match my attire. It was the absolute authority of a man who owned the building. He made the call. 2 minutes later, the private elevator doors slid open, and I ascended to the 45th floor. Arthur Blackwood was waiting for me. He was a man of 60 with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my son's car. He didn't flinch at my appearance. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just opened the door to his office and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. "Drink," Arthur said. "You look like hell, Edward." I took the glass. My hand was steady. I didn't drink it. I set it down on his mahogany desk right next to the pristine blotter. "They made their move, Arthur," I said. "Sunnyvale." Arthur's face darkened. He sat down heavily in his leather chair. "So soon. We thought we had another month." "They got greedy," I replied. "Jason has crypto debts. Brittany has fraud charges pending if she doesn't pay off the credit cards. They accelerated the timeline. They tried to drug me. They tried to ship me off to the warehouse to die." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. I placed it on the desk. "This contains the recordings, the conspiracy, the attempted murder. It is all there." Arthur picked up the drive. "We go to the police, not yet," I said, cold. "The police will arrest them. They will get bail. They will get lawyers. They will spin a story about a senile father and a misunderstanding. I don't want them arrested, Arthur. Not yet. I want them destroyed." I walked over to the wall behind his desk. There was a painting of a ship in a storm. I knew what was behind it. "Open the safe, Arthur. I need the briefcase." Arthur nodded. He moved the painting and spun the dial. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, sitting alone on the velvet shelf, was a battered brown leather briefcase. It looked worthless. It looked like something you would find at a garage sale for $5. Arthur pulled it out and set it on the desk. He looked at it with reverence. "My family thinks I am a retired government auditor living on a fixed pension," I said, running my hand over the cracked leather. "They think the house is the only asset I have. They think they are fighting over a few $100,000. I clicked the latches. They sprang open with a familiar snap. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. There were no diamonds. There was just a sheaf of yellowing papers, legal documents dating back 20 years. "They don't know about Aegis," I whispered. 20 years ago, before I retired, I was called in to audit a small, chaotic tech startup operating out of a warehouse in Seattle. 2 kids with brilliant minds and absolutely no concept of tax law. They were drowning in IRS red tape. I spent 6 months untangling their finances. I saved them from prison. When the job was done, they couldn't pay my invoice. They were broke. So they offered me equity, stock options in a company that didn't even have a product yet. I took the stock. I filed the papers. And then I forgot about it. 10 years later, Aegis went public. Today, they are the leading cybersecurity firm for the Pentagon. I picked up the top document. It was a share certificate. 30%. "My family thinks I am poor," I said, looking at Arthur. They don't know that I am the silent majority shareholder of a company worth $400 million. Arthur smiled. It was a shark's smile. The current valuation of your portfolio as of this morning's bell is $42 million, Edward. $42 million. And Jason was ready to kill me for a house worth 500 grand. The scale of their stupidity was almost insulting. They are fighting for crumbs while standing on a gold mine, I said, dropping the paper back into the case. And because they treated me like a burden, because they tried to erase me, they will never see a cent of it. I looked at Arthur. Activate the protocol. Arthur paused. His hand hovered over the intercom. Omega Protocol, Edward. That is the nuclear option. That means total asset freeze. That means forensic surveillance. That means we don't just stop them. We let them commit the crime fully so we can bury them under it. Do it, I commanded. Arthur pressed the button. Sarah, get the team in here. We are initiating Omega for the Mercer estate. I want eyes on every bank account, every text message, every movement. Contact the private security firm. I want a perimeter around Edward's house, invisible but tight. He looked back at me. Where will you go? You can't go home. No, I said. I am dead. Or at least I am missing. Let them think I escaped and died in a ditch. Let them think they won. Let them get comfortable. I walked to the window looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Jason and Brittany were probably celebrating. They were probably drinking my scotch, thinking the old man was gone, thinking the house was theirs. Call Jason, I said to the reflection in the glass. Call him tomorrow. Tell him you represent a private spa facility. Tell him I checked myself in voluntarily. Tell him I am confused but happy. And tell him I want to sign the power of attorney papers on Saturday night. At my birthday party. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You want to give them a party? I turned around. The vagrant was gone. The auditor was back. I don't want a party, Arthur. I want a stage. They want to sell my house, fine. Let's invite the buyers. Let's invite their creditors. Let's invite everyone they are trying to impress. I want them to feel the victory in their hands. I want them to taste the champagne. And then when the lights are brightest, I want to show them exactly what they bought. Arthur nodded slowly. He picked up the phone. It is done. I looked down at my dirty scrubs. I need a suit, Arthur, and a barber. If I am going to execute my own family, I should at least look the part. Arthur set a sleek black laptop on the mahogany desk, turning the screen toward me. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a desk lamp and the city lights sprawling outside the 45th floor window. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, still wearing the borrowed jacket and dirty scrubs, sipping a glass of water. My hands were steady. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. I typed in the encryption key. It was a 20-character string I had memorized years ago, a sequence that unlocked the digital backdoor to my own life. The screen flickered, then resolved into a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds. I had installed the cameras 6 months ago, disguised as smoke detectors and motion sensors. At the time, I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself I was an old man seeing shadows where there were none. Now, staring at the pixels on the screen, I realized it wasn't paranoia. It was intuition. The feed from the master bedroom was the first thing that caught my eye. It was live. The timestamp in the corner read 8:43 p.m. The room that I had shared with Lydia for 10 years, the sanctuary where I had nursed her through the flu and held her when her mother died, looked exactly the same. The same beige curtains, the same oak dresser. But the atmosphere was wrong. It was violated. Lydia was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was wearing her silk robe, the one I bought her in Paris. She looked pale, her hair disheveled, still recovering from the chemical trip I had sent her on that morning. But she wasn't alone. Gavin stood by the dresser. My neighbor. The man who borrowed my lawnmower and never returned it. The man who called himself a financial visionary but drove a leased BMW. He was opening my jewelry box. He picked up my gold cufflinks, holding them up to the light, turning them over in his fingers, like a pawn shop owner assessing a desperate client's goods. He put them in his pocket. Then he walked over to the bed. He sat down next to Lydia. He put his arm around her. I watched, feeling a physical ache in my chest, a phantom pain where my heart used to be. But I didn't look away. I zoomed in. The audio feed kicked in crisp and clear. "Are you sure he is gone?" Gavin asked, his voice smooth, oily. Lydia leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "My shoulder. Jason took care of it. He is in the van. By now he is strapped to a bed in Sunnyvale, drooling on himself." Gavin chuckled. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her lips. It was a lingering, possessive kiss. It wasn't the kiss of a new lover. It was the kiss of a man who had been there many times before. I watched my wife kiss another man in my bed on the day she thought she had successfully committed me to an asylum. The betrayal wasn't hot. It wasn't fiery. It was ice. It froze the blood in my veins. It killed the last tiny, foolish part of me that had hoped this was all a misunderstanding, a temporary madness induced by debt. This wasn't madness. This was long-term. This was structural. "Did you find the policy?" Gavin asked, pulling away. Lydia nodded. She reached under my mattress, and pulled out a thick envelope. "The accidental death rider is valid immediately. If he dies from a fall or a household accident within the first month of confinement, it pays out double. 3 million. Gavin whistled. "That creates a nice nest egg for us, babe. We can finally get that condo in St. Bart's." Us. The word hung in the air. They were planning a retirement on my grave. Gavin wasn't just a lover. He was the architect. He was the one who had probably suggested the drugs. He was the one who had poisoned her mind with dreams of islands and millions. I switched the feed. Camera 3. The study. Jason was there. My son. He was pacing back and forth in front of the wall safe, the large steel box, hidden behind the portrait of his late mother, my first wife. He was sweating, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie gone. He held a cordless drill in one hand and a sledgehammer in the other. He looked like a feral animal. Brittany was sitting in my leather reading chair, scrolling on her phone. "Hurry up, Jason," she snapped. "The locksmith said he couldn't come until morning. We need that cash now." "I know," Jason shouted, spinning the dial furiously. He tried a combination. He yanked the handle. Locked. He tried another. His birthday. Locked. He tried Lydia's birthday. Locked. He screamed a sound of pure, impotent rage and swung the sledgehammer. It connected with the dial sparks flying. He hit it again and again. The dry wall around the safe cracked and crumbled, dust filling the air. "He thinks the money is in there," I said softly to the empty office. "He thinks I keep millions in cash like a drug dealer." Arthur, standing behind me, poured another drink. He watched the screen over my shoulder. "Does he know the combination?" "No," I said. "I changed it yesterday." Jason dropped the hammer. He picked up the drill. He pressed it against the steel door, leaning his entire body weight into it. The drill whined, a high-pitched scream of metal on metal. He pushed until the bit snapped, sending a shard of metal flying past his cheek. He threw the drill across the room. It smashed into my display case, shattering the glass protecting my collection of vintage model ships. He fell to his knees, sobbing. Not out of sorrow, out of frustration, out of greed. Why, he screamed at the steel door. "Why do you have to be so difficult even when you are gone?" Brittany stood up. She walked over to him. She didn't comfort him. She kicked his leg. "Stop crying. It is pathetic. If we can't open it, we take the whole thing. We cut it out of the wall." Jason looked up at her, his eyes red and wild. And take it where it weighs 500 pounds. Then hire someone, Brittany yelled. Use the credit card. The cards are maxed out. Brittany. Jason roared, standing up and getting in her face. The Russians want their money on Monday. If that safe is empty, we are dead. I leaned closer to the screen. I wanted to see his fear. I wanted to study it. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. This was the boy I had sat with while he did his math homework. I had given him every opportunity. I had given him a safety net. And he had used it to fashion a noose. I watched him tear at his hair. I watched him grab a heavy bronze statue from my desk, an award for forensic excellence, and smash it against the safe door over and over again, denting the metal but never breaching the seal. He was destroying my home. He was destroying my legacy. And he was doing it with the desperate entitlement of a child who believes the world owes him a living. I switched back to the bedroom feed. Gavin was now wearing my silk smoking jacket. He was standing in front of the mirror, admiring himself. Lydia was pouring champagne. They were toasting. To Edward, Gavin said, raising his glass. The most generous benefactor a man could ask for. Lydia laughed. To Edward. May he rest in peace. Soon. I closed the laptop. The snap of the lid was final. I sat in the silence of the office, breathing in the scent of old paper and expensive leather. The pain was gone. The grief was gone. In its place was a vast, cold landscape of clarity. They weren't my family. They were targets. They were liabilities. And as any good auditor knows, when a liability becomes toxic, you don't rehabilitate it. You liquidate it. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there in the house on Elm Street, 3 people were celebrating a victory that hadn't happened. They were drinking my wine. They were wearing my clothes. They were breaking my walls. They didn't know that the safe was empty. I had moved the documents to the bank 3 days ago. There was nothing in there but a single sheet of paper with a single word typed in the center, checkmate. But they wouldn't find that tonight. They would spend the next 2 days tearing the house apart, turning on each other, drowning in their own panic. Arthur, I said, not turning around. Yes, Edward. Get the barber, get the tailor, and get the private jet ready. I turned to face him. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. We have a party to plan, and I want to make sure I look my best when I burn their world to the ground. The phone on Arthur's desk was a piece of modern art, sleek and black, but right now it looked like the trigger of a detonator. I sat in the leather chair watching the digital display as Arthur punched in my son's number. I had instructed him to put it on speaker. I needed to hear the frequency of Jason's desperation. I needed to hear the exact moment his panic shifted to greed. It rang once. Jason picked up immediately. "Where is he?" Jason screamed into the receiver. His voice was cracked, high-pitched. It was the voice of a man who had spent the last 12 hours trying to break into an empty safe while imagining Russian loan sharks breaking his knees. "If this is the police, I want a lawyer. My father is missing. He is sick." Arthur didn't blink. He leaned back in his chair, his voice a smooth, calming baritone cultivated in courtrooms and boardrooms. "Mr. Mercer, this is Arthur Blackwood. I am your father's legal counsel." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, terrified silence. Then Jason spoke, breathless. "Blackwood, the corporate guy, why are you calling? Where is my father? Is he dead?" "He isn't dead," Arthur said, examining his fingernails. "He is comfortable. He contacted me early this morning. It seems he had a moment of clarity amidst his episodes. He realized he was becoming a burden to you and your mother." I leaned forward, gripping the armrests. This was the pivot point. If Jason smelled a rat now, he might run. But I was banking on his narcissism. I was banking on his belief that he deserved to be burden-free. A burden, Jason repeated, the edge leaving his voice. Yes. Yes, he has been very difficult lately. Violent, even. We were trying to get him help when he ran off. He didn't run off, Mr. Mercer. Arthur corrected gently. He checked himself in. He is currently at the sanctuary. It is a highly exclusive, secure wellness facility in the mountains. No phones, no internet. Total isolation for mental recalibration. He didn't want to worry you, but he felt he needed immediate professional intervention. The sanctuary. It didn't exist, but it sounded expensive enough to be real. Jason exhaled a sound like a tire deflating. Okay. Okay, he is safe. That is good. But listen, Arthur, we have a situation here. A time-sensitive financial situation regarding the house. The buyer Edward is aware of the situation, Arthur interrupted. In fact, that is why he called me. He feels terrible about the stress he has caused. He wants to make it right. He wants to sign. I heard a thud on the other end, like Jason had dropped into a chair. He wants to sign everything, Arthur confirmed. The power of attorney, the deed transfer, the release of the trust. He wants to hand over the reins, Jason. He knows he isn't capable anymore. I closed my eyes. It was the lie I knew he wanted to hear more than anything in the world. It validated every horrible thing he had done. It told him he was right to drug me, right to trap me, because even I, in my lucid moments, agreed that he should be in charge. When Jason asked, "I need it now, today." "Protocol at the sanctuary is strict," Arthur said. "No visitors for 72 hours. However, your father has made a specific request. He wants to come home on Saturday evening." Saturday. Jason's voice spiked. "That is 3 days away. I can't wait until Saturday. It is his 70th birthday, Mr. Mercer." Arthur said, his voice hardening slightly. "He wants one final dinner in his own home. He wants to celebrate with his family and his friends. He wants to sign the papers over cake and champagne surrounded by the people he loves. He sees it as a passing of the torch." I watched the seconds tick by on the clock. I knew what Jason was calculating. The Russians wanted their money on Monday morning. Saturday night was cutting it close, but it was doable. It gave him Sunday to organize the wire transfers. "Fine," Jason said. "Saturday. But he signs everything. No games. No episodes. He will be medicated and compliant." Arthur assured him. "Just make sure the party is ready. He wants it to be a grand affair. He mentioned inviting your business associates. He wants to publicly acknowledge you as the head of the household." I could practically hear Jason's ego inflating over the phone line. He didn't just want the money. He wanted the glory. He wanted to parade his victory in front of the people he owed money to. "We will do it," Jason said. "Saturday night. 7th Huzro p.m. Tell him. Tell him we love him." The line went dead. Arthur looked at me. "Tell him we love him," he repeated, shaking his head. "That boy has ice water in his veins." "No," I said, standing up and walking back to the laptop with the camera feeds. "Ice is clean. He is sludge." I opened the laptop. The feed from the living room came to life. Jason was standing in the middle of the wreckage he had created. The drywall was smashed. The furniture was overturned. But he wasn't crying anymore. He was smiling. He turned to Brittany, who was pacing in the kitchen. "We are back in business," he shouted. Brittany ran in. "What did they find him?" He checked himself into a spa. Jason laughed, grabbing her by the waist and spinning her around. The old fool felt guilty. He is coming back Saturday to sign everything over. He wants a party. He wants to give me the house as a birthday present to himself. Brittany's eyes widened. Saturday. That is, that is perfect. We can invite the broker. We can invite the lenders. We can show them the ink is drying. Get the phone Jason ordered. Call the caterers. Call the cleaners. I need this place to look like a palace. And call Gavin. Tell him to bring the good stuff. We are celebrating. I watched them. They hugged. They kissed. It was a celebration of vultures who had just spotted a fresh carcass. They didn't question why I had gone to a spa. They didn't question why a man they tried to paralyze was suddenly cooperative. Their greed blinded them to the obvious inconsistencies. They saw what they wanted to see: a victory without a fight. Lydia walked into the room. She looked terrible, her makeup smeared, her robe torn. "What is going on?" "We won, Mom," Jason said, pouring her a glass of the scotch he had been drinking straight from the bottle. "Dad is giving up. He is signing the house over on Saturday." Lydia took the glass. Her hand was shaking, but she smiled. A crooked, venomous smile. Is he completely out of it?" "Arthur says he is compliant," Jason said. "He knows he is beaten." I sat in the dark office watching my family toast to my defeat. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already redecorating the house. Jason pulled out his phone. I watched him dial. I knew who he was calling. The Russians. He was going to promise them their money on Monday. He was going to leverage a future he didn't own. "Let them build the stage," I whispered to the screen. "Let them polish the floor. Let them invite the audience." Arthur stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the city. "You know, Edward, most clients would just take the money and run. They would let the police handle it." "I am not most clients, Arthur," I replied, not taking my eyes off my son, who was now dancing around the living room with a lampshade on his head, mocking me. "I spent 40 years fixing mistakes, and Saturday night I am going to fix the biggest mistake I ever made." I closed the laptop. The screen went black. I didn't need to see any more. I knew exactly what they would do for the next 3 days. They would spend money they didn't have to throw a party for a man they hated. They would invite the wolves into the sheep pen, thinking they were the shepherds. They didn't know that the sheep was actually a wolf in a cardigan. And I was hungry. I spent the next 72 hours inside the machine. While my son was busy ordering expensive floral arrangements and hiring a string quartet for my birthday, I was deep in the digital catacombs of their financial lives. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I existed on black coffee and the cold, hard dopamine hit of discovery. To the uninitiated, a bank statement is just a list of numbers. To a forensic accountant, it is a psychological profile. It is a diary of sins. It tells you who a person is, what they fear, and what they are willing to destroy to keep their secrets. And my family. They were terrified. I started with Brittany, my daughter-in-law, the woman who wore designer shoes she couldn't afford and looked at me like I was a stain on her carpet. I knew she had been using my credit cards for small luxuries, but the scale of her desperation was hidden in the sub-ledger. I logged into the credit monitoring service Arthur's team had set up. The alert was blinking red. A hard inquiry on my credit report from 3 days ago. But it wasn't from a bank. It was from a shell company registered in Delaware, a front for a lending outfit that operated in the gray zones of the law. I drilled down. I accessed the loan documents using the backdoor administrator codes I had retained from my consulting days. There it was. A loan application for $500,000. The collateral was my house. The applicant was me. But the digital signature wasn't mine. It was a clumsy forgery traced from an old birthday card I had given her years ago. She had scanned my signature, digitized it, and pasted it onto a contract with an interest rate of 40%. I tracked the disbursement. The money hadn't gone into my account. It had been routed through a series of digital wallets before landing in an account in the Cayman Islands. But Brittany wasn't smart enough to clean the metadata. The account was linked to a crypto exchange. She wasn't just paying off Jason's debts. She was doubling down. She had taken $500,000 of blood money and thrown it into the same volatile market that had ruined her husband. She was gambling with my life to try and win back her own. I printed the transaction history. That was Exhibit A. Next, I turned my attention to Gavin, my neighbor, the man sleeping in my bed. He called himself a financial advisor, but his license had lapsed 4 years ago. I ran a background check on his firm, GS Holdings. It was a ghost ship. No employees, no assets. Just a P.O. box in a strip mall. I accessed my pension fund portal. This was the money I had saved from my government salary, the honest money I had planned to use for travel and spoiling my grandchildren, if I ever had any. The balance read 0. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the transaction history. 6 months ago, right around the time I started feeling foggy, a transfer authorization form had been submitted. It authorized GS Holdings to manage the entire portfolio. Gavin hadn't invested it. He had liquidated it. I followed the money trail. It was a winding path designed to confuse amateurs, but to me, it was a neon sign pointing the way. The funds had moved from my pension account to GS Holdings, and then in a series of rapid-fire transfers to a personal account in Belize. I hacked into the Belize bank's server. It took me 4 hours to bypass their firewall, but once I was in, the truth was staring me in the face. The account was in Gavin's name, but there was a secondary cardholder attached to it. Lydia Mercer. They had stolen $800,000 of my hard-earned retirement money and parked it in a tropical tax haven, waiting for the day I stopped breathing. They were going to retire on my sweat. They were going to drink margaritas on a beach paid for by 40 years of my audits. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. This wasn't just theft. This was an erasure of my past. They wanted to take everything I had built, every hour of overtime, every missed holiday, and turn it into their playground. I printed the transfer logs, Exhibit B. Finally, I looked at Lydia, my wife, the woman who had sworn to love me in sickness and in health. I knew about the accidental death rider she had mentioned to Gavin, but I needed the hard proof. I needed the policy itself. I accessed the database of the major insurance carriers. It didn't take long. There was a new policy issued 3 weeks ago. The premium was astronomical, $5,000 a month. I checked the payment source. It was coming from a dividend check that was supposed to be mailed to me quarterly from a small bond investment. She had intercepted the mail, forged my endorsement, and used my own money to pay for a bet on my death. I opened the policy document. It was standard boilerplate until I got to the exclusions and riders. There it was in black and white. The home accident clause. If the insured died within the primary residence due to a fall fire or structural collapse, the payout tripled. $3 million. But there was something else. A date. The policy had a contestability period. If I died within the first 2 years, the insurance company would investigate. Unless the death was certified by a medical professional as being consistent with a pre-existing degenerative condition that led to the accident. I scrolled down to the medical examiner section of the application. The attending physician, who had signed off on my degenerative condition and approved the policy risk, was none other than Dr. Reed. He wasn't just the executioner, he was the underwriter. He had certified that I was a fall risk, setting the stage for the payout. He had created the paper trail that would justify my accidental death down the stairs. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark office. The picture was complete. It was a masterpiece of fraud. Brittany had leveraged my present assets to cover her gambling. Gavin had stolen my past savings to fund his future. And Lydia had sold my future life to the highest bidder. They had partitioned me. They had carved me up like a Thanksgiving turkey before I was even dead. They didn't see a husband or a father. They saw a resource. A line item, a ticker symbol that was about to be delisted. I looked at the clock. It was 4:00 a.m. on Thursday. I had been working for 3 days straight. My eyes burned. My body ached. But my mind was sharper than it had been in decades. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the means. Now I just needed the venue. I compiled everything into a single encrypted file. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. I sent a copy to the district attorney's personal email set with a delayed send timer for Saturday night at 9:00 p.m. If anything happened to me, if their plan succeeded, and I didn't walk out of that party, the truth would still detonate. But I planned on walking out. I stood up and stretched my joints, popping. So I walked over to the mirror in Arthur's office. I looked at the man reflected there. The scrubs were filthy. The beard was gray and unkempt. The eyes were tired. But behind the exhaustion, I saw the predator. I saw the man who had brought down Enron executives and cartel money launderers. I saw the man who didn't get mad, who got even. They wanted a senile old man to sign away his life on Saturday. They wanted a victim. I was going to give them a performance. But when the curtain fell, they would realize they weren't the audience. They were the props. I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur's extension. "Wake up, Arthur," I said. "The audit is complete. Now let's go shopping. I need a suit that says, 'I own you.'" The hospital scrubs hit the floor with a soft, defeated rustle. I kicked them aside, watching the blue fabric pool on the marble floor of Arthur's private bathroom like a shed skin. For 6 months, I had worn the uniform of the geriatric invalid sweatpants that were 2 loose cardigans that smelled of mothballs and slippers that shuffled against the floor. I had let my posture slump. I had let my beard grow into a patchy gray mess that screamed of neglect and senility. I had become the ghost my family wanted me to be. But ghosts don't conduct audits, and ghosts don't wear Italian silk. Arthur had made the call an hour ago. The barber arrived with a leather case that looked suspiciously like a sniper's kit. He was a man named Giuseppe, a maestro of the straight razor, who had been trimming the jaws of this city's power brokers for 40 years. He didn't ask why a man looking like a vagrant was standing in the executive suite of a top-tier law firm. He simply draped a hot towel over my face and went to work. The heat was suffocating at first, a stark contrast to the cold dampness of the van and the chill of my unheated house. But as the steam penetrated my pores, I felt the fog lifting. The smell of sandalwood and eucalyptus filled the air, replacing the scent of bleach and betrayal. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythmic stropping of the razor against leather. Shh, shh, shh. It was the sound of preparation, the sound of a blade being honed for a specific purpose. When Giuseppe pulled the towel away, the air hit my skin cool and bracing. He tilted my chin up. The blade touched my throat. It was cold steel, unforgiving and precise. I didn't flinch. I trusted the blade more than I trusted my own son. He scraped away the gray stubble. He sheared off the unkempt hair that had hung over my ears. He trimmed the eyebrows that had grown wild. With every stroke of the razor, the confused old man named Edward Mercer, the victim, the burden was carved away. When he was finished, he spun the chair around. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the trembling grandfather who forgot to turn off the stove. The jawline was still there, sharp and square. The eyes were clear, cold, and assessing. The deep lines around my mouth didn't look like wrinkles of worry anymore. They looked like scars of experience. I looked like I did 20 years ago when I walked into a boardroom and told a CEO that he was going to prison. I looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Giuseppe dusted my neck with talcum powder and nodded. "You look like a new man, Mr. Mercer." "No," I corrected him, standing up and tipping him $100. "I look like the old man, the one they forgot about." I walked into the main office where Arthur had set up a garment rack. Hanging there inside a black, breathless bag was my armor. It was a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit from Savile Row, tailored for me 5 years ago, for a state dinner I never attended. I had kept it in storage at the firm, a relic of a life I thought was over. I pulled it out. The fabric was cool to the touch, heavy with quality. I put on the crisp white shirt, the starch stiff against my skin. I fastened the buttons, my fingers moving with a dexterity that would have terrified Jason. I didn't fumble. I didn't shake. I slid into the trousers, the cut perfect, allowing for movement, for action. I tied the tie. A full Windsor knot. Symmetrical, tight. A noose for them, a badge for me. Then came the vest. And finally, the jacket. It settled onto my shoulders like a second skin. It changed the way I stood. It forced my spine straight. It pulled my shoulders back. I wasn't slumping anymore. I was towering. I walked over to the safe and pulled out the small velvet box Arthur had retrieved for me. Inside were my cufflinks, not the gold ones Gavin had stolen. These were platinum inlaid with onyx. They were heavy. I snapped them into place. Click, click, the sound of a weapon being loaded. I reached for the final piece. My watch. A vintage Patek Philippe that I had bought with my first major bonus in the 80s. I wound it carefully, listening to the tiny gears engage. Tick, tick, tick. The countdown had begun. I slipped my feet into the polished black Oxfords. They shone like mirrors. I took a few steps, hearing the solid, authoritative crack of the heel against the floor. It was the sound of a man who owned the room he was walking into. I walked out of the dressing room and into the main office. Arthur was on the phone, but he stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. He slowly lowered the receiver. He stood up. My God. Edward, Arthur whispered. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I caught my reflection in the glass superimposed over the city lights. The transformation was complete. The senile old fool was dead. He had died in the back of a van on the highway. The man standing in the window was the auditor, the man who balanced the books, the man who collected debts. I reached into the inside pocket of the jacket and pulled out the folded invitation Jason had emailed to his associates. It was on heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering. A celebration of life and legacy. The 70th birthday of Edward Mercer. I smoothed the paper with my thumb. They wanted a patriarch to sign away his kingdom. They wanted a prop for their theater of greed. I put the invitation back in my pocket and turned to Arthur. The lines on my face hardened into a mask of absolute resolve. Is the car ready? I asked. Arthur nodded. The Rolls is downstairs. The security team is briefed. They will wait for your signal. Good, I said. I checked my watch. We have 48 hours until the curtain rises. I want to spend the next 2 days reviewing the files again. I want to memorize every dollar they stole. I want to know the exact date and time of every betrayal. When I walk into that house on Saturday, I don't want to just accuse them. I want to dissect them. I walked toward the door, my coat swirling around my legs. Let's go, Arthur. I have a birthday party to attend, and I hate being late. The house I had built with 40 years of honest labor had been transformed into a grotesque carnival of greed. Searchlights swept the night sky, cutting through the November gloom, with beams of rented extravagance. A line of cars that cost more than the neighborhood's combined annual income snaked down the street. Bentleys, Ferraris, and ominous black SUVs with tinted windows that didn't belong to bankers. Valets in white jackets were running back and forth, parking the vehicles of the people my son was desperate to impress. I watched from the back seat of the Rolls-Royce parked in the shadows across the street. Through the tinted glass, I saw the desecration of my sanctuary. The oak trees I had planted were strangled by string lights that flickered with a nervous, manic rhythm. A plush red carpet ran from the curb to the front door, crushing the flower beds of hydrangeas I had tended since my first wife passed. It wasn't a birthday party. It was a coronation for a king who had stolen his crown. Inside, through the sheer curtains of the bay windows, the living room was a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Jason had invited the city's elite, or at least the people who pretended to be. There were local politicians known for taking bribes, real estate developers with liens on their souls, and tech entrepreneurs who had never turned a profit. But scattered among the peacocks were the wolves. I saw them standing near the barmen with thick necks and suits that fit too tightly across the shoulders. They weren't drinking the champagne. They were watching Jason with the dead patient eyes of predators waiting for a check to clear. These were the creditors, the Russians. The loan sharks Jason had borrowed millions from to fuel his gambling addiction. He had invited his executioners to his victory lap, thinking he could pay them off with hors d'oeuvres until I signed the deed. It was a level of hubris that was almost impressive. Jason moved through the crowd like a man on fire. He was laughing too loud, his gestures wide and erratic. He held a crystal flute in one hand and a cigar in the other, ash falling onto the Persian rug he planned to sell on Monday morning. He looked powerful, but I knew the signs. I saw the tremor in his hand when he brought the glass to his lips. I saw the way his eyes darted to the front door every 30 seconds. He was terrified. He needed me to arrive. He needed the prop to complete the play. Brittany was playing the role of the gracious hostess circulating through the room with a smile that looked like it was stapled onto her face. She was wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized instantly. It had belonged to my mother. She must have taken it from the safe before they realized the cash was gone. She was clinging to the arm of the city's zoning commissioner, laughing at his jokes, selling the image of old money and stability. But her eyes were tight. She was watching the creditors, too. And in the corner holding court near the fireplace were Lydia and Gavin. Lydia looked pale, her makeup applied with a heavy hand to hide the ravages of the drug trip and the stress. She was leaning heavily on Gavin, who was wearing my tuxedo. My tuxedo. It was a size too small for him, the sleeves riding up his wrists, but he wore it with the arrogance of a squatter who believes he has won adverse possession. They were whispering, clinking glasses, looking at the room as if they had built it, not stolen it. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of expensive perfume, stale cigar smoke, and fear. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner, the delicate notes struggling to be heard over the cacophony of ambition and deceit. It was a house of cards held together by sweat and lies, and everyone inside was dancing on the edge of a cliff. Jason climbed onto a small dais he had erected in front of the fireplace. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The sound rang out sharp and demanding. The room quieted. The wolves stopped prowling. The peacocks turned their heads. Friends, partners, distinguished guests, Jason boomed, his voice amplified by a microphone system that was entirely unnecessary for a living room. Thank you for coming tonight. We are here to celebrate a milestone. My father, Edward Mercer, turns 70 today. But more importantly, we are here to celebrate a legacy. He paused for effect, looking out at the crowd, his eyes lingering on the Russians in the back. Tonight, my father will be joining us to formally hand over the stewardship of the Mercer estate. He is passing the torch. He has realized that the future belongs to the young, and he is ready to rest. Applause rippled through the room. Polite, expectant. The creditors didn't clap. They just crossed their arms, waiting for their payout. He is on his way now from his retreat, Jason continued, wiping sweat from his brow. He is eager to sign the next chapter of our family's history. So please drink, eat, and get ready to welcome the man of the hour. I pressed the button on the door handle. The lock clicked open with a sound like a pistol cocking. The man of the hour was here. But I hadn't come to pass the torch. I had come to burn the house down. Driver, I said softly, adjusting my cufflinks. Pull up to the carpet. It is showtime. The valet opened the door of the Rolls-Royce. I stepped out onto the plush red carpet my son had rented with stolen money. I didn't need a cane. I didn't need an arm to lean on. I straightened my jacket, felt the reassuring weight of the platinum cufflinks, and walked toward the front door of my own home. The security guard, a hired thug Jason had placed at the entrance to keep out the riffraff, stepped aside instantly. He knew the difference between a guest and the owner. I pushed the double doors open. The blast of air conditioning hit me, carrying the scent of expensive lilies and cheap desperation. The hum of conversation died instantly. The string quartet trailed off into a discordant squeak. 150 heads turned. They were expecting a frail, confused old man, perhaps in a wheelchair, perhaps drooling, guided by a nurse. They were expecting a victim. Instead, they saw a man in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the average car. They saw a man with a fresh haircut, a steady gaze, and the posture of a general inspecting his troops. I walked into the room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I didn't look at the guests. I looked straight ahead at the dais where my son stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his glass of champagne tilted dangerously in his hand. The silence was absolute. I saw the Russians in the corner straighten up. They weren't looking at Jason anymore. They were looking at me. They recognized power when they saw it. They saw the Patek Philippe on my wrist. They saw the way I moved. They realized in that split second that the boy on the stage had lied to them about who held the keys to the vault. Jason recovered first. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding his shock. He forced a smile onto his face, a grotesque rictus of panic and feigned joy. He jumped down from the dais and rushed toward me, arms wide open. "Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Look at you, the sanctuary did wonders. You look fantastic." He reached me and tried to hug me. It was a clumsy attempt to establish physical dominance to guide the old man to his mark. I didn't hug him back. I stood rigid, letting him bounce off my shoulder. I looked him in the eye. I saw the terror swimming behind his pupils. He smelled of sweat and fear. "I am feeling much better, Jason," I said, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. "Clarity is a wonderful thing." Jason laughed, a nervous, braying sound. Yes, it is. Come, Dad. Come up here. Everyone is waiting for you." He grabbed my elbow, trying to steer me. I didn't resist, but I didn't let him lead. I walked beside him, matching his pace, forcing him to hurry to keep up with me. We ascended the dais. The room watched, mesmerized. Brittany was standing there, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. She looked at my suit, then at my face. She knew. I saw it in her eyes. She knew the game had changed. But she was too deep in the hole to stop digging. "Here, Dad," Jason said, shoving a microphone into my left hand and a heavy gold fountain pen into my right. He pointed to a document lying on a small podium. It was the deed transfer. It was already notarized with the stolen stamp. "Just say a few words to your friends." Jason whispered, his voice trembling so much the microphone picked it up. "Tell them you are happy. Tell them you are retiring. And then sign the line. The buyer is watching." He gestured to a man in the front row, a slick real estate developer who was currently frowning, wondering why the senile seller looked sharper than the broker. I took the pen. It felt heavy, cold. I looked at the document. It was a masterpiece of fraud. It gave Jason power of attorney, ownership of the house, and control of my future medical decisions. It was my death warrant printed on legal bond paper. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Lydia and Gavin in the corner. Gavin had stopped drinking. He was staring at me, his face pale. He recognized the suit. He realized he was wearing a cheap imitation while the genuine article stood on stage. I raised the microphone. Jason held his breath. The room leaned in. I held the pen over the paper. Jason's eyes widened with anticipation. He was so close. He could almost taste the money. I smiled. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "My son wants me to sign this paper. He wants me to give him everything. And I think he deserves exactly what is coming to him." Jason exhaled a sound of pure relief. But first I continued lowering the pen, but keeping the microphone raised. Before we conclude this transaction, I think it is important that we review the due diligence. I have prepared a short presentation. Jason froze. Presentation. Dad, we don't need a presentation. Just sign. I ignored him. I pulled a small remote control from my pocket. I pointed it at the massive projection screen Jason had set up to show photos of his successful life. Hit the lights, Arthur, I said into the microphone. The room went dark, and the show began. The projector hummed to life, a beam of white light cutting through the darkness of the room. It hit the massive screen behind me, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The crowd shifted, glasses clinking softly, expecting a montage of nostalgic photos. A baby Edward, a young Edward, graduating, a smiling Edward at a picnic. They expected a sentimental journey through a life well lived, the visual eulogy of a man retiring into the sunset. Jason smiled nervously, his hand still gripping my elbow, trying to maintain the illusion of the loving son guiding his father through a tribute. He looked at the screen, waiting for the first slide to validate his narrative. Instead, the screen resolved into a high-definition wide-angle shot of my kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 7:58 a.m. The room went deadly silent. The image was crisp. Every detail was visible. The granite countertops, the morning light, and Lydia standing over 2 bowls of oatmeal. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Why are we watching breakfast?" someone whispered. I leaned into the microphone. Exhibit A. I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The preparation. On screen, Lydia looked over her shoulder. The camera hidden in the smoke detector captured the guilt etched into her features. She pulled the packet from her pocket. She poured the powder. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the expensive sound system Jason had rented. "Just your vitamins, sweetheart," the Lydia on the screen cooed. "Eat up." In the corner of the room, the real Lydia let out a strangled gasp. She dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and violent, but no one looked at her. They were glued to the screen. They watched as I switched the bowls. They watched as Lydia ate the poison intended for me. They watched as the drugs took hold, turning her into a writhing, hallucinating mess on the floor. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. A man in a tuxedo lowered his drink, his face pale. This wasn't a blooper reel. This was a crime scene. Then the video cut to Jason entering the kitchen. The crowd watched as he stepped over his own mother, ignoring her screams for help. They heard him shout at me, "Just shut up and die already." The words boomed through the living room, stripping away the veneer of the dutiful son. Jason, standing next to me on the dais, turned a shade of gray I had never seen on a living human being. He tried to reach for the laptop connected to the projector, but Arthur stepped in front of him, blocking his path with the immobility of a bank vault door. "Let it play," Arthur said softly. I clicked the remote. The scene changed. "Exhibit B," I announced. The motive. The screen now showed my master bedroom. The timestamp was from Thursday night. The camera angle was intimate, looking down from the ceiling fan. It showed Lydia sitting on the bed, my bed, with Gavin. Gavin, who was currently standing near the bar wearing my tuxedo, froze. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. On screen, Gavin had his arm around Lydia. He was holding a glass of my wine. "Are you sure he's gone?" Gavin asked on the screen. "He is in the van," Lydia replied. "By now, he is a vegetable." The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The socialites, the politicians, the bankers, they all turned their heads to look at the real Gavin and Lydia. The judgment was instantaneous. The mask of the grieving family friend and the devoted wife had been ripped away, revealing the adulterous conspirators underneath. The accidental death rider pays out double. Lydia said on the screen, her voice cold and calculating. 3 million. We can finally get that condo in St. Bart's. To Edward, the on-screen Gavin toasted, raising his glass. May he rest in peace soon. I looked at the real Gavin. He was backing away toward the French doors, trying to disappear into the night. But the path was blocked. Two of the men in the cheap suits the Russians Jason owed money to stepped into his way. They didn't say a word. They just crossed their arms and stared at him. Gavin stopped. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above the collar of my shirt. I clicked the remote again. Exhibit C, I said. The execution. The screen shifted to the study. It showed Jason sweaty and disheveled, swinging a sledgehammer at my wall safe. It showed Brittany cheering him on. If that safe is empty, we are dead, Jason screamed on the video. The Russians want their money on Monday, the room erupted. The word Russians acted like a trigger. The polite facade of the party disintegrated. The real estate developer in the front row stood up, his face flushed with anger. He looked at Jason. You told me the title was clear, he shouted. You told me you had the deed. You are leveraging a property you don't even own to pay off loan sharks. Jason held up his hands, trembling. No, wait. It is a misunderstanding. The video is... It is a deepfake. He is trying to frame me. I pressed play again. The audio drowned out his lies. You had a good run, old man, the on-screen, Jason sneered, leaning over the camera's perspective. You sat on a gold mine and gave us crumbs. Well, the bank is open now, and you are making a withdrawal. A permanent one. The cruelty in his voice was absolute. It wasn't the voice of a desperate man. It was the voice of a predator. The guests began to back away from the dais. They looked at Jason with revulsion. They looked at him like he was a disease. The social distance between him and his friends grew into a chasm. He was alone on that stage. I lowered the microphone. I looked at the creditors in the back of the room. The men Jason had invited to witness his triumph. They weren't looking at the screen anymore. They were looking at Jason. Their faces were impassive, stone cold, but their eyes promised violence. They realized they had been played. They realized there was no inheritance. There was no sale. There was only a liar who had wasted their time. Jason saw them looking. He realized his protection had just evaporated. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face, snot running from his nose. Dad. Please turn it off, he begged, grabbing my lapel. I am your son. You can't do this to me. They will kill me. I looked down at his hand on my suit. I carefully peeled his fingers away, one by one. You aren't my son, Jason, I said, my voice amplified for everyone to hear. You are a bad investment, and I am writing you off. I looked over at Lydia. She was standing by the fireplace, clutching the mantel for support. Her face was ashen. She looked from the screen to me, then to Gavin, who was currently being boxed in by the creditors. The reality of her situation hit her all at once. The shame, the exposure, the fact that her lover was a fraud and her husband was the executioner. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the Persian rug in a heap of silk and stolen jewelry. It wasn't a fake faint this time. It was a total system shutdown. Brittany screamed. She rushed to Lydia but then stopped, realizing that helping her mother-in-law wouldn't save her own skin. She looked around the room searching for an exit, but the security guards Arthur had hired were blocking the doors. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. Then a single document appeared. It was a deed transfer. This morning, I said, addressing the room, I transferred the title of this property to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. A collective gasp went through the room. This house does not belong to me anymore, I continued, and it certainly doesn't belong to him. I pointed at Jason. I also liquidated my pension and donated it to the victims of elder abuse. The accounts my family was trying to steal are empty. I looked at the real estate developer. "I suggest you rip up that check, sir. You are trespassing on charitable property." The developer spat on the floor, glared at Jason, and turned to leave. That was the signal. The dam broke. The guests began to flee. They didn't want to be associated with this. They didn't want to be witnesses. They grabbed their coats and ran for the door, pushing past the security guards. But the creditors didn't leave. They stayed. They moved closer to the dais, forming a semicircle around Jason. I stepped down from the stage. I walked through the parting crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. I walked over to Gavin. "Nice suit," I said. Gavin couldn't speak. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "I think you stretched the sleeves," I added. "You can keep it. You will need something nice for the arraignment." I walked past him toward the front door. Behind me, the chaos was reaching a fever pitch. Jason was screaming for security, but the security worked for me. Brittany was sobbing, trying to call her father, but getting no answer. Lydia was still unconscious on the floor. And the Russians were just waiting for me to leave. I reached the double doors. I pushed them open. The cold night air hit my face. It felt clean. It felt pure. Arthur was waiting by the car. "Is it done?" he asked. I adjusted my cuffs. "The audit is closed, Arthur. The books are balanced." Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights flashed against the trees down the street. The police were coming, not to save them, to arrest them. I didn't look back. I got into the car. "Drive," I said. "I have a flight to catch." I stood at the threshold of the double doors, watching the flashing lights wash over the frantic crowd. The siren wail cut off abruptly, replaced by the slamming of car doors and the shouting of orders. A phalanx of uniformed officers stormed up the driveway, pushing past the valet stand and the terrified socialites who were scrambling to retrieve their luxury cars. The lead officer, a stern man with the look of someone who had seen every variety of human greed, stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at me, then at the chaotic scene inside the living room behind me. "Mr. Mercer," he asked, his hand resting on his holster. I nodded. "The deed is done, Lieutenant. The evidence has been delivered to the district attorney. Every person inside that house who is not a guest is currently trespassing on property that now belongs to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I have the digital transfer confirmation right here." I held up my phone. The screen glowed with the official seal of the county clerk. The officer signaled his team. "Go. Secure the perimeter. No one leaves until they are identified." They surged past me, a wave of blue uniforms flooding the foyer. I turned back to watch the finale. It was a scene of absolute pandemonium. Jason was still on the dais, screaming at the creditors to back off, trying to maintain the illusion of control even as the walls closed in. "Officer, arrest these men," Jason shouted, pointing at the Russians. "They are threatening me." The police ignored the creditors for a moment and headed straight for Jason. Two officers grabbed him by the arms, spinning him around. They kicked his legs apart. Jason Mercer, the officer, announced, his voice booming over the remnants of the Mozart quartet. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Jason struggled, his face contorted with shock. "You can't arrest me. This is my house. My father gave it to me. It is not your house, sir," the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists. "And from what I understand, you don't have a father anymore. You have a plaintiff." Across the room, another team had cornered Gavin. He tried to blend into the curtains, but the tuxedo I had lent him made him stand out like a beacon. When the officer grabbed his shoulder, Gavin shrieked. "I didn't do anything. I was just the financial advisor. She made me do it." He pointed a shaking finger at Lydia, who was just beginning to stir on the floor. The loyalty of thieves had evaporated the moment the steel bracelets came out. Lydia sat up, blinking in the harsh lights of the police flashlights. She looked around, confused, her drug-addled brain struggling to comprehend why her victory party had turned into a raid. An officer pulled her to her feet. She stumbled, her silk dress torn. "Lydia Mercer, You are under arrest for insurance fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder, the officer recited. Murder, she whispered, looking at me standing in the doorway. But he is alive. Attempted murder carries a heavy sentence too, Lydia, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. And considering the amount of evidence I just uploaded to the cloud, I don't think you will be getting bail. Brittany was the last to fall. She was trying to sneak out through the kitchen, but Arthur had positioned a private security guard at the back exit. The police marched her back into the living room. She wasn't screaming. She was sobbing quietly, realizing that her credit card schemes and forged signatures had left a paper trail a mile wide. The creditors, the men in the cheap suits, watched it all with stone faces. They realized they weren't getting paid. The asset was gone. The mark was going to prison. They exchanged a look with the police, then slowly raised their hands, allowing themselves to be ushered out. They would deal with Jason later in the way that men like that deal with bad debts in prison yards. I watched them haul my family away. They were dragged across the red carpet they had rolled out for themselves, kicking and screaming, paraded past some of the neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk to watch the spectacle. Jason saw me as they shoved him toward the patrol car, his eyes locked with mine. Dad. He screamed a raw, desperate sound. Help me, I am your son, I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold satisfaction of a balanced ledger. The man you are looking for is dead, Jason, I said calmly. He died in the back of a van on the highway. I am just the executor of his estate. The officer slammed the door, cutting off his screams. I turned to Arthur. The house was empty now, save for the police cataloging the evidence and the ruined decorations of a party that never really started. Let's go, Arthur, I said, walking down the steps to the waiting Rolls-Royce. The air smells better out here. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but when they are greased with a mountain of irrefutable forensic evidence, they grind exceedingly fine. The trial was less of a legal battle and more of a public autopsy of a family unit that had rotted from the inside out. Dr. Reed was the first to fall. The medical board didn't just revoke his license, they incinerated his professional existence. The man who had sneered at me in my kitchen, needle in hand, stood before the judge trembling in a cheap suit that didn't fit. He traded his country club membership for a 15-year sentence in a state penitentiary for medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. He cried when the gavel came down, weeping for his lost status rather than the lives he had ruined. Brittany fared no better. Her tears in the courtroom were dry, performative things that failed to move a jury disgusted by her forgery and elder abuse. The forensic trail of the credit card fraud was a straight line leading directly to her crypto wallet. She received 8 years in a minimum security facility. The look she gave Jason as she was led away wasn't one of shared sorrow. It was the venomous glare of a woman realizing she had bet her life on a horse that broke its leg at the starting gate. Jason got 12 years. The fraud, the embezzlement, the conspiracy to kidnap. The judge called him a parasite who had fed on the goodwill of a father who gave him everything. But the heaviest hammers fell on Lydia and Gavin. The video of the poisoned oatmeal was played on a loop for the jury. The intent was undeniable. Attempted first-degree murder carries a heavy price. Life without the possibility of parole. Gavin tried to cut a deal in the 11th hour, tried to sell out Lydia, claiming he was a victim of her manipulation. But the paper trail of my stolen pension funds proved he was the architect of the financial theft. They were sentenced together, shackled side by side, bound now not by lust or greed, but by the shared misery of a cage. I watched it all from the gallery, my face impassive. I didn't feel joy. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of an equation finally resolved to zero. As the bailiffs prepared to transport the prisoners to their permanent facilities, Jason's lawyer petitioned for a brief moment between father and son. Against Arthur's advice, I agreed. I needed to look him in the eye one last time, without the cameras, without the audience, without the noise. I walked to the holding area, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind me. Jason sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed to the bar. He looked small. The arrogance that had fueled his dance around my living room was gone, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Dad," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Please. You have money. You have connections. You can get me into a better facility. You can put money on my commissary books. We are family." I sat down across from him. I adjusted my platinum cufflinks. I looked at the man who had called me a vegetable, who had toasted to my death. I leaned in close, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "That word," I said softly. "Family. You keep using it. But I don't think you know what it means." Jason sobbed, shaking the table. "I made a mistake. I was desperate. I am your flesh and blood. You can't just leave me here with nothing." I shook my head slowly. "No, Jason. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. You broke the contract. You cooked the books. And now you are being audited." I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. I didn't look back at him. I looked at the door. "I don't have a son," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I have a defendant, and the case is closed." I walked out of the room, leaving his screams echoing off the concrete walls, a sound that faded into background noise as I stepped into the hallway. I stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. The air tasted different. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like the future. The Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb, its engine purring, a beast ready to run. Arthur stood by the door, holding it open, a smile of genuine relief on his face. Beside him stood Elena, the head nurse I had met during my brief hospital checkup after the escape. She was the one whose testimony about Dr. Reed's shady practices had been the final nail in his coffin, a woman of integrity who had seen the truth when everyone else saw a senile old man. She smiled at me. She wasn't looking at my wallet. She wasn't looking at a victim. She was looking at a survivor. "Ready, Mr. Mercer?" she asked. I smiled back, feeling the muscles in my face relax for the first time in 6 months. "Ready, Elena." I got into the car. The leather was soft. The champagne was cold. I picked up the glass and looked out the window as the courthouse receded in the rearview mirror. "To new beginnings," I whispered. "Driver, take us to the airport. The plane is waiting." And just like that, the old man who ate oatmeal in a kitchen that smelled of bleach was gone. In his place was a man with a world to see and a life to live. And for the first time in 40 years, the books were perfectly, beautifully balanced. We spend our lives building homes and families, believing that blood is the ultimate bond. But my journey taught me a brutal truth. Sometimes the people sitting at your table are the ones poisoning your food. True family is not defined by DNA, but by loyalty, respect, and integrity. Never let your love for others blind you to their cruelty. If you find yourself surrounded by those who view you as a burden or a bank account, remember that you hold the pen. It is never too late to audit your life, cut your losses, and walk away into a better future. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and retribution. Let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven them, or did they get exactly what they deserved?